Hi, welcome to the second episode of What's Baking with Sarah Morin. On this episode, we will be baking this beautiful cake right here. It's a chocolate cake with rich buttercream frosting and candy rocks. Let's get started. For this cake, you will need 2/3 of a cup butter or margarine. I am using butter because the icing I'm going to use for the cake is buttercream. It's already out on the counter, so I might as well use it. 1 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Without sugar, cake would just be weird bread. Feel free to put that quote under a picture of J.D. Salinger. See if you can trick your English teacher into printing it out and sticking it on the wall of your classroom. Sometimes I put my intrusive thoughts in videos. It gets viewers' attention. 2 cups of the white powdery stuff, which is what I call all-purpose flour. 1/2 cup of cocoa powder, sifted to remove the clumps. 2 teaspoons baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon baking soda. More white powdery stuff to make uncomfortable jokes about. 1/2 teaspoon salt, the most delicious of the minerals. 3 eggs, to help bind the ingredients together. 1 1/2 cups of milk. The milk helps raise the moisture content of the cake and keep it soft. Vanilla extract. The flavor comes from the seed pods of the vanilla plant folia. It's a species of orchid native to Central America. So the next time somebody calls your style vanilla, remind them that they're a toxic person that needs to drop the ego if they want to be able to form healthy and long-lasting relationships. For icing, we will need 1 cup butter, 8 cups icing sugar, 2/3 of a cup 1/2 and 1/2 cream, 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, a cocoa powder and matcha powder to taste, but we will get to that later. For the equipment, you will need 2 mixing bowls. Avoid using aluminum ones in baking. They make white liquids turn gray when you whisk some. They also make good hats. 2 9-inch round cake pans. These don't make good hats. A spatula, a whisk, and a sieve. These will be used to mix the batter and to occupy yourself while the cake is baking. An electric mixer to ensure that everything is evenly mixed. For the decorating process, you will need a piping bag and a leaf tip. I used the Wilton 352 leaf tip to be specific, but you can use any tip that has a V shape to it. Grease and flour your baking pans. The batter is very fluid, so you need to make sure you don't miss any of the edges or corners. Chop the butter into small cubes. I tried using the electric mixer to cream it, but it was cold that day and the butter was solid. So I switched to a spatula. Once the butter is well creamed, add the sugar and mix until uniform. Crack in the eggs and pour in the vanilla. Make sure you don't get any of the shells in the batter. If you do get any of the shells in the batter, scoop them up with another piece of shell. Pour the milk into the bowl slowly and in stages, so that it doesn't splash while mixing. Preheat the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This will give the oven enough time to heat up. Mix the flour, salt, baking powder, baking soda, and cocoa powder in the dry bowl. Make sure the cocoa powder is evenly distributed. Cocoa is hydrophobic and doesn't mix well with milk. Dispersing it into the dry ingredients helps it mix more easily with the wet ones. With the electric mixer, incorporate the dry ingredients and with wet ingredients. Pour the dry ingredients slowly so that the dry ingredients don't fly up in the air and out of the bowl. Fill the pans evenly and lightly bang them on the counter to get out any of the larger air bubbles. Place the pans in the oven and bake for 30 minutes. Now that the cake is in the oven, we can start making the frosting. You're going to need 1 cup butter, 2/3 of a cup half and half cream, 8 cups icing sugar, 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, about 2 tablespoons of matcha powder, and cocoa powder to taste. In the video, I used half a cup of cocoa powder. This would turn out to be a terrible mistake. Chop the butter into cubes and put them in the bowl. I used the electric mixer to beat the butter for the buttercream. I want to make sure it's as evenly creamy as possible. Add the sugar and the cream in stages so that everything has a chance to become incorporated evenly. Once it becomes too thick to mix with your electric mixer from the 80s, switch to a spatula to finish off the mixing. Add the vanilla and mix until uniform. Once the frosting is thick enough to stay stuck to the bottom of the whisk, divide it evenly into 2 bowls. Add the cocoa powder into the frosting. Unlike me, you will not have to panic when you realize you accidentally added too much cocoa powder. You will add it in 1 tablespoon at a time and test it for taste and texture as you go. You won't put too much in and have to compensate by adding icing from the other bowl. You will add it in 1 tablespoon at a time and test it for taste and texture as you go. After that, add about 2 tablespoons of matcha to the other icing bowl and whisk. Add a couple drops of food coloring if you want it to be greener. Be careful not to add too much. Cover the bowls in plastic wrap and place them in the fridge until they're ready to be used. Once the cakes are done baking, place them on a wire rack. Let them cool for 10 minutes and then remove the cakes from the pans. Let them continue cooling until they are room temperature. Now it's time for the fun part. We're going to need the frosting we made earlier, a piping bag with piping tips, a spatula, and chocolate river rocks. You can use a cake stand if you have one, or you could use a normal plate if you don't have one. Put a dollop of icing on the cake stand and place one of the cakes on top. Drop more icing on top of that layer and sprinkle some of the chocolate river rocks. Place the second layer on top and start icing the sides of chocolate frosting. The icing was pretty thick, so it was a little difficult to spread it on the sides of the cake. Once there is an even layer of frosting, sprinkle more chocolate river rocks on top. Attach the piping tip to the piping bag and fill it with the matcha frosting. It can be a little messy, so be prepared to get dirty. To make the plants, create a small mound of icing. Add leaves to the mound by applying a small burst of pressure and then letting go quickly. This creates a leaf with a thick bottom and a thin point on top. This is when disaster struck and my piping bag sprung a leak. I only got to make a couple of plants for the top. Out of desperation, I started spreading the rest of the icing on the side to try to save the cake. I'm pretty sure I'm cursed. Hopefully it'll at least taste good. Let's find out, shall we? The milk and the buttercream managed to keep the cake moist. The matcha frosting is noticeable, but not overpowering. Even though it's not very pretty, it's still delicious. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of What's Baking with Sarah Morin. I got to teach you about different cake decorating and baking techniques. There's a written version of this recipe in the description below and on my website. If you have any questions, comment them below. And as always, stay safe and have a wonderful day.